By midnight that night, my father-in-law would learn something about me that had nothing to do with the uniform he'd banned from his daughter's engagement party, and everything to do with why his company was still standing after the flood that nearly buried it. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Claire Bennett. I've spent 14 years in the Army, and the night Richard Calloway told me my dress uniform was, in his words, not appropriate for a room full of real professionals, he had no idea he was talking to the officer whose signature had already saved his business once, without him ever knowing my name. He was about to learn it, loudly, in front of everyone he'd invited to impress. Welcome back to Final Orders, where the truth always arrives exactly when it's least convenient for the people who tried to bury it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who mattered too much to correct, this one's for you. Drop a comment and subscribe. You're going to want to see how this ends. I met David Calloway at a logistics conference 18 months earlier. He was easy to like, funny, curious, genuinely interested in what I did instead of intimidated by it. His father, Richard, ran Calloway Freight and Storage, a regional shipping company his grandfather had built from 3 trucks into a fleet of 400. Old money trying very hard to look like it had always been old. Richard decided, within about 10 minutes of meeting me, that a career Army officer was a phase his son was going through. He was polite about it the way wealthy men are polite about things they've already dismissed. A firm handshake, a question about my little job, and then a full conversation redirected toward David's future in the company as if I weren't standing there. I didn't correct him. In my line of work, you learn that the people who need you most are usually the last to know it, and there's rarely any profit in announcing your rank at a dinner table. I let Richard believe what he wanted to believe. It cost me nothing. 3 weeks before our engagement party, David called me sounding uneasy. "My dad wants to talk to you about the party," he said. "About what you're planning to wear." I already knew. I always knew with Richard. He'd requested, through David, never directly to me, that was his pattern, that I not wear my uniform to the engagement dinner. 200 guests, business partners, city council members, a photographer from the Regional Business Journal. Richard's exact words, relayed secondhand. "Tell her this is a professional event. I don't need people asking her about deployments when they should be talking about the merger." There it was. 14 years of service reduced to a conversation piece he didn't want competing with his headline. If you've ever had someone you love ask you to make yourself smaller so they could feel bigger in the room, tell me with the word rank in the comments. I promise you, it matters to what happens next. I want to tell you the truth about that week, because it wasn't dramatic. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten to call off the engagement. I sat with it, the way you sit with an order you don't like but understand completely. Here's what Richard Calloway didn't know about me and what I hadn't bothered to tell him, because he'd never once asked a question that would have led there. I don't run supply convoys anymore. I haven't in years. I now serve as the regional liaison between the Army Corps of Engineers and civilian infrastructure during federal disaster response, which is a long way of saying that when a flood, a hurricane, or an industrial failure hits a county in my region badly enough to need federal help, my office decides which private assets get prioritized for emergency use and in what order. 8 months earlier, in April, a levee failed 40 miles north of the city. $300 million in commercial property sat in the floodplain. My team had 48 hours to decide which warehouses got sandbag crews, pump trucks, and National Guard manpower first, and which ones we simply couldn't reach in time. Calloway Freight and Storage had $11 million of inventory sitting in a warehouse 200 yards from the water. I don't remember approving that allocation because I was thinking about David's father. I remember approving it because the shift supervisor at that warehouse, a woman named Denise Ortiz, had gotten 40 employees safely out through a service exit before the water rose, and her facility scored high on our salvageability index. My office prioritized it. My signature was on the authorization. Richard never asked how his warehouse survived when 3 others on the same street didn't. He told the Business Journal it was good planning and good luck. He never once considered that luck had a rank and a name. I decided 3 weeks before the party that I wasn't going to leave the uniform at home, not to prove a point to Richard, to stop leaving a version of myself at home for people who'd never once earned the right to ask for that. The engagement party was held in the atrium of the Calloway corporate headquarters. Glass ceiling, a string quartet, a step-and-repeat banner with the company logo that told you exactly whose night this was actually supposed to be. I walked in, wearing my dress uniform, ribbons squared, insignia catching the light exactly the way it's supposed to. David saw me first, and something in his face relaxed, like he'd been holding his breath for 3 weeks and had just been allowed to let it out. Richard saw me next. I watched the smile freeze on his face mid-greeting to a city councilman, watched him recalibrate, watched him decide, in real time, that the correct move was to say nothing and handle it later, quietly, the way he handled everything. He got his chance sooner than he wanted. 20 minutes in, over the hors d'oeuvres, he pulled me aside with a hand on my elbow that was just a little too firm to be friendly. "I thought we discussed this," he said, low enough for only me to hear, a smile still fixed on his face for anyone watching from across the room. "This is a room full of investors, Claire. I need them thinking about the merger, not about—" He gestured vaguely at my chest, at 14 years compressed into ribbons he couldn't be bothered to learn the names of. "This." I looked at him for a long moment. "Richard," I said, just as quietly, "I'm not here to compete with your merger. I'm here because your son asked me to marry him, and I said yes as the person standing in front of you, not a version of her you'd prefer." He didn't get to respond, because that was the exact moment the lights in the atrium flickered and the building's emergency intercom crackled on. "Attention! This is a facility alert. All personnel, please move calmly to the nearest exit. This is not a drill." A transformer fire 2 floors below had knocked out primary power and triggered the suppression system early, filling the stairwells with smoke before the fire department even arrived. 200 guests in cocktail dresses and tuxedos in an unfamiliar building with the power flickering and a haze starting to creep along the atrium ceiling. I want to be honest about what happened in the next 90 seconds, because it wasn't heroic in the way movies make it look. It was procedure. 14 years of procedure running exactly the way it's built to run when everyone else's training hasn't kicked in yet. Richard froze. I watched him, mid-sentence, mid-crisis, simply stop functioning, the way people who have never had to function under pressure often do the first time it actually matters. I didn't. "Everyone, listen to my voice," I said, and I said it the way you say it when you need 200 strangers to obey you in the next 4 seconds, not the next 4 minutes. "Do not use the main stairwell. It's compromised by smoke. Move to the west corridor. Single file. Stay low if the haze thickens. I need 3 volunteers to help anyone who can't move quickly. You, and you. Thank you." I didn't ask permission. I didn't wait for the building's own security team, who I could see through the haze, standing near the west doors, looking exactly as lost as Richard had a moment earlier. One of them, a young guard who couldn't have been older than 23, looked at my uniform, looked at the chaos, and did the only sensible thing available to him. He asked me what to do. For the next 6 minutes, I ran that evacuation the way I'd run 100 smaller ones in places far worse than a glass atrium in a mid-size American city. 200 people out, 0 injuries beyond a twisted ankle and 1 very ruined pair of heels. The fire department arrived to find the building already cleared, guests accounted for in an orderly line across the parking lot, and a building security supervisor telling the battalion chief, with something like relief in his voice, "The officer over there already handled the evac, sir. She's got a head count." Richard found me at the edge of the parking lot. His tie was loose, his face was pale, and for the first time in 18 months, he was looking directly at me instead of past me. "You did that," he said. Not a question. "It's the job, Richard," I said. "The one you didn't want competing with your merger." He was quiet for a long moment, and then he asked the question I'd been waiting 18 months for him to think to ask. "What exactly is your job, Claire?" So, I told him. I told him about the levy in April. I told him about the salvageability index, about Denise Ortiz and the 40 employees she got out through a service exit, about an $11 million warehouse that survived because a signature landed on a form he never once asked to see. I watched him do the math, the same math I'd done for him, quietly, 8 months before he ever thought to wonder why his company was still standing. "That was you," he said. "That was my office," I said. "But yes, that authorization had my name on it." Richard didn't apologize that night, and I want to be honest with you because I think honesty is worth more than a tidy ending. He still hasn't apologized in so many words, not really, even now. But something shifted in that parking lot that never shifted back. At our wedding 4 months later, he stood up during the toasts, unprompted, and said, in front of the same crowd from the merger he'd been so worried about, that he'd spent a year assuming his daughter-in-law's uniform was a costume for a job she'd grow out of, and that he'd been wrong about almost everything it meant. He didn't need to say the rest. Everyone in that room who'd been at the engagement party already knew it. I still wear the uniform to family events. Nobody's asked me not to since. And every so often when Richard introduces me to a new business partner, I notice he doesn't call me David's fiancée anymore, or David's wife the way he used to. He calls me Lieutenant Colonel Bennett and lets them ask the questions themselves. Here's what I've learned. In 14 years of being underestimated by people who mattered too much to correct, you rarely have to prove anything to the people who doubt you. You just have to keep doing the job. Sooner or later, the moment arrives on its own, and it does the explaining for you. If you've ever been asked to shrink yourself for someone else's comfort and you didn't, type the word standing in the comments below. And if this story reminded you of your own uniform, your own quiet proof, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. That's the final order. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.